Madison proper, you're looking at for the right house between 30 and I've heard of 50 offers on a property. So price point is still kind of the main driver as far as competition goes. I'm not going to blame the baby boomers, but we still have the issue of the baby boomers. They're living longer, they're healthier, they've made smart investments, and now they're gobbling up a lot of what the first-time home buyers want to purchase. This issue of first-time home buyers are in this, $200,000 to $300,000 price range. And so are these baby boomers who are downsizing, who could care less what interest rates are because they're buying it in cash. So
welcome to Critical Thinking Required, hosted by LBW. This podcast is intended for free thinkers, entrepreneurs, and knowledge seekers. Join us as we discuss relevant financial topics, explore with guests their financial journeys, and engage with experts in industries such as space, media and entertainment, real estate, and many more. Buckle up and enjoy the ride. Welcome to Critical Thinking Required. You're with your hosts, myself, Tim Bickmore, and my two colleagues, Dan Weiss and Nathaniel Leach. And today we're going to be talking about real estate. It's a very big topic in many different ways. And so we have a guest with us today to talk about that, Lindsay Koch. And she is a realtor here in Madison. And so we're going to be talking specifically about the Madison market. I know our clients and our listeners are probably thinking, oh, let's talk about California or Salt Lake City or some other Idaho. But no, we're going to talk about Madison. We're going to talk about for our Wisconsin clients here and discuss Dane County and what's going on. So before we start, I would just want to, let everybody know if you like our content, please like, share, and subscribe to our stuff. We really appreciate it. It helps us continue to grow what we're trying to do, which is just educate people on different subjects. So again, like, share, and subscribe. We would appreciate it. Lindsay, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you coming on board.
absolutely. It's always fun to chit chat with you guys.
So my first question, that is true too. I should say that Lindsay also was on a podcast with us. We were just talking about it almost a year and a half ago. So I believe it was November of 2020 that we discussed this. So everyone should actually go back and listen to that one and then listen to today's and be like, hey, you know what? We're pretty spot on. We're looking pretty good. So thank you for joining us again too. I should say that as well.
Yes, absolutely. Hopefully my predictions I made in the last podcast came true. Otherwise, I guess you can call me out if need be.
Crossing the fingers. So the first question that we have, and I think this is a question that most people would probably want to ask you, but what trends are you seeing in the Madison/Dane County housing market currently?
Currently, we are very similar to where we were last year. Last year was an anomaly. Any realtor you talk to, especially those who had been in the industry for decades, had never seen a market like we saw last year. So we're all kind of holding our breath at the end of December to just see what happens, because January is when everything went crazy last year. And sure enough, new year must just get people excited. And so buyers came out once again in full force beginning of 2022. And so trends are relatively similar to what they were last year as far as obviously still a seller's market, more buyers looking to buy than there are sellers looking to sell. But the caveat is now we're even more expensive. So purchase prices have gone up even more than they were last year. So I know quite a few people last year were like, this is insanity. I'm going to hang up my hat. This will go down at some point. As it stands now, we are still trending up. And in my opinion, we're still going to continue to trend up for quite some time. So definitely still a seller's market. Definitely still, depending on where you are. I just wrote an offer actually down in Evansville, and we were up against 20 other offers, and we didn't get it. So Madison proper, you're looking at for the right house between 30 and I've heard of 50 offers on a property. So price point is still kind of the main driver as far as competition goes. And it's really anything below 500,000. You're still going to be getting quite a bit of competition. I have a client in the 450 to 500 range, and she's still going up against 10 to 15 other offers. So Madison, still a really, really tight, tough market, but I'm sure we'll get to it. There are kind of tips and tricks that have been working.
For our West Coast followers too, just because we have a large client base, as people know, on the West Coast, Evansville being a much more rural community compared to Madison, is probably about, since everyone, at least in the West Coast, talks in a matter of time, right? About 30 to 40 minutes, maybe outside of the center of Madison. Which is a long way, actually, by our terms. And somewhere like LA, that's down the street. But nonetheless, that would be a lot of offers for those areas. Speaking of which, too, being that we have the great expertise of Lindsay coming back again, and I'm sure this won't be the last time that happens. And we appreciate that too. We will likely also do the same with contacts that you've heard before on here in the LA area, just so viewers kind of hear that.
So. Lindsay, I'm curious, what do you think's driving the trends?
It's a question that I get quite often, like, why is it so crazy? And it was a question I asked myself a lot last year. I think the pandemic led it a little bit. So like when the pandemic hit, I was ready to hang up my hat. I actually started another business. I left to bake. So I was baking out of my house and I was ready to just be in my kitchen all day, every day. Well, people started working from home, or people's businesses started to shut down. And so they started to spend a lot more time in their house. And they also realized, hey, if I don't have to go into my Madison office anymore, I don't want to live in Madison if I don't have to, for a number of reasons. Either they want a bigger yard, they want more bang for the buck for a house that they want to buy. 2021 was that's when the market went super, super crazy. So it was still a seller's market in 2020. I was still busy, but not nearly as busy as most of us were in 2021. And again, I think people were hopeful that 2021 was going to be the end of COVID. Obviously, that didn't happen. But I think people were just sick of being stuck at home with the safer at home and all that kind of stuff. So I think that kind of fed people's like personal desire to want to get into the market. But then also low interest rates. They still stayed very, very low. So I think that also, it was like a perfect storm of, hey, I can live anywhere and interest rates are low. And I mean, maybe I'm the only one, but like I wasn't going out to eat as much. Like I saved a lot of money in 2020 that kind of maybe helped people, again, kind of bridge that gap of, oh, I was 5,000 short for, doing a 20% down, and look at all the money I saved by not being social and being a normal human being in 2020. So, so I think that plays a little bit into it, but we've talked about this in the past. Madison is just in general a more insulated market than even Milwaukee. So I'm from the Milwaukee area, and so I look at the Milwaukee market pretty closely as well. And when COVID hit, and a lot of people either lost their jobs or weren't able to come into their jobs, they were affected a little bit more than we were here, because it was, oh, I work for Pomega, I work for Epic, I work for Exact Sciences. My partner was working for Covance, and it was a very easy transition to just say, okay, well, now you work from home. Whereas retail workers, store managers, those kind of people, when you're not in the store or in the restaurant or in the business, you're not getting paid. So Madison, again, was very insulated from that. A lot of people thought that eventually, with all the assistance that was given in 2021, that at some point when that ran out, we would start to see foreclosures, we'd start to see a real dip in the market. And again, that just didn't really happen. So I think just the economy in general in Madison helps insulate the market so that we don't have those dips as, say, more like Milwaukee types of settings.
Lindsay, I've got two questions for you. The first one, just based off of what you just said there too, is that Madison, if I recall seeing this correctly, saw roughly about twice the growth in the real estate market in 2021, residential speaking, compared to the country at large. And it makes sense that a lot of that is due to people being able to afford those prices because they were able to work in those staples within the area. But we also saw, I think, a large migration of people from different areas into Madison. Could you speak perhaps specific to Madison as to what perhaps that draw was, and if you have an idea as to what that impact happened to be? And then separate from that, and I could break this up if it's easier to answer, but separate from that, one of the trends that we saw show up in 2021 that drove us crazy, that we don't see in the Midwest, very commonplace, or I should say in the Midwest, unlike common places in Los Angeles or San Francisco, is we saw waiving of contingencies that are just not typical here, right? Waiving of inspection, waiving of financial contingency. The inspection one drove us crazy, right? Now that in other places goes all day long, but here that's really not found that often. But we were seeing it with at least half deals that people were running past us. So I'm curious as to, has that trend kind of gone away again? Is that still in play? So they're kind of two separate questions, however you want to tackle that.
So the first one, just as far as migration. So I had a couple clients actually leave the Madison area for one reason or another. But what we were talking about before is a lot of West Coast people started to migrate to Madison, because Madison, Wisconsin people might chuckle, but Madison is still relatively affordable in comparison to other big cities, in comparison to Salt Lake City, Denver, Austin, obviously, especially LA, San Francisco. So we still have the cool, fun vibe of, these bigger cities, but with the relatively affordable house prices that, again, people migrating from these bigger cities kind of gobbled up, right? So that's definitely, I should say, hindered, obviously, those current residents, because, their salaries aren't as big, whatever it may be. So there's definitely been a little bit of competition with that. And then your second question was totally not related to people migrating, but I will make the connection somehow. So again, with those people migrating in, they didn't bring the trend. And I honestly don't know. I don't really even know how the trend got started with waiving these contingencies. I think it just came to the point of everybody was coming with 20% down, or everybody was coming super aggressive with, X% over asking, that it was like, okay, well, now what? So I think the appraisal contingency was the first one that people started to get creative with. And so those that don't know, when you get financing, whether you want to or not, the bank will order an appraisal. So a third party comes and verifies that what the bank is giving you for your mortgage, that the house is actually worth it. So this third party does their analysis. They come in, usually they come in and actually tour the home, and then they say yay or nay. Yes, it's worth this, or no, it's not. Well, in 2021, when we were exploding and people were offering 10, 15, 20, 50, 100,000 over the asking price, there were no comparable properties to be comparing that to. So we ran into quite a bit of issues with appraisals in the beginning half of the year. Once those properties started to close, appraisers then had kind of ammunition to be like, okay, you're offering 50,000 over in Monona. That makes sense, because there are five other properties that also closed and had competing offers for that much over. So I think that's when people started to feel a little bit more comfortable of being like, okay, well, then I'm going to waive the appraisal. And so no matter what it comes in at, If it comes in low, I'll make up that money, which again, not everybody can afford to do that, right? You're offering 20,000 over the appraised value. And if it doesn't appraise, typically that money either comes out of the money you're doing for your down payment, or that money comes out of your pocket at closing. And so if you're putting 3% down, most of the time you don't have a whole lot of wiggle room to then be bringing an extra $20,000, $30,000. So again, we ran into a few snafus with the appraisal contingency, but that is definitely a trend that has continued. And what has now kind of accompanied that is now sellers and listing agents realized that they now needed proof. So if you were saying, hey, I can bring an extra $20,000 over the appraised value, well, now the sellers are like, okay, we'll prove it. So either I want to see a bank statement, which typically only was needed when you were paying cash. You would need to provide proof of funds. But now if you're agreeing to pay a good chunk of money over the appraised value, especially if you're only doing like 3 or 5% down, we're going to want to send some sort of proof that you do have extra funds to cover that, because otherwise the deal is going to fall apart in the middle of the transaction, which, yes, you could probably put your house back on the market and get another offer, but it's a risk. So that's kind of become a new trend in 2022, is wanting to see financial proof that you can pay over the appraised value. And then with the inspection, yes, waiving the inspection last year became very, very common. Obviously, a lot of people got bit in the butt because then they realized, oh, actually the furnace isn't working properly, or actually there are some missing shingles on the roof. So now definitely still a trend, but actually sellers and listing agents are starting to feel a little bit more comfortable if you have an inspection contingency with some sort of cap. So you're saying, hey, I want to do an inspection. The inspection is really only supposed to be meant to make sure that you're not buying a POS, so that it's not going to fall down tomorrow. That was the whole point of an inspection. But during the buyer's market, they started to get a little bit greedy, and they're like, oh, there's a pull in the rug, replace the carpeting, or oh, there's a burner, burnt out on the stove, replace the stove. That doesn't fly anymore. And sellers don't want to putz around with really small things. So if you write an inspection contingency and you say, but I'm going to take care of any issues totaling under $5,000 or totaling under $10,000, seller, I'm not going to ask you to fix any of that stuff. So it's kind of you showing the seller like, hey, I'm really only concerned about the big stuff, right? So that's kind of a creative way that some buyers have been getting their offer accepted. However, if sellers have done everything in the kitchen sink, that's when they're expecting buyers to waive their inspection. So they have a new roof in the past, 1 or 2 years, new furnace, new AC unit. Like if they've gutted the place and now they're listing it again, you as a buyer, it's very possible that the majority of the people writing offers are going to be waiving their inspection because all of that big stuff has already been done. But I tell all of my clients, number one, I'm not here to spend your money. And number two, it's your house. So I will tell you tips, tricks. I will let you know potentially what the competition is going to be doing. But at the end of the day, you got to do what's right for you. And I'm here to represent you and your needs the best way that I can. But again, I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't telling you what you're potentially going up against, just so that it's not a surprise when you're like, oh, well, I didn't know people would be waiving their inspection. Well, that's why I tell you up front. So does that make sense?
It does, Lindsay. Thank you. And one quick, and I think actually some of this data you had turned us on to too is correct or not, a lot of the activity that was displayed as cash offers was not exactly cash offers. We were seeing in 2021 a lot of people that were leveraging their current home to the max and pulling out cash to make it look like a cash offer going into the next property. But of course, that exposes a risk if they can't sell their house and find themselves underwater. That correct? That there was a lot of that activity as well.
Yes, and so that's kind of continued. And so either they're showing, like they take out a home equity line of credit and they show, hey, I have X amount to do that, or they show like a statement from their 401k to say if worse came to worse, I would pull the funds out of my 401k. But then they would turn around and they would finance it, or they would have a family member show their proof of funds. They would be on the offer to purchase. This happened to me in my listing. And then 3 days before closing, they submitted an amendment wanting to change the name that was going to be on the title and on the deed, because it was, a father buying it for a daughter, which, it ended up closing, but it's just kind of rubbing you the wrong way when you're like, I don't know if I feel comfortable agreeing to this, on behalf of my seller. But that's, again, when you're writing cash, that's where this whole proof of funds thing comes in, is that if you're going to say, hey, I'm going to pay cash, they're going to say, well, where is this coming from? And so lenders are actually starting to get creative and fully underwriting your loan before we even start the process of writing an offer. And so the benefit of that is, again, in a transaction, you have your appraisal contingency, you have your inspection contingency, and you have your financing contingency typically. Well, if you still want to do an inspection, you can still do an appraisal, but if we can at least get rid of one of the three contingencies by not having your offer contingent on the financing, it might beef up your offer a little bit. And so the proof of funds would be actually just us satisfying your financing contingency by submitting your loan commitment. So typically when you're in the middle of your transaction, you get a loan commitment from the lender right before closing. So anywhere between 25 and 30 days after your accepted offer. So if we can at least appease the sellers up front by saying, actually, I've already turned in everything, underwriting has already looked and approved my offer, like we are good to go. Then you might, as a buyer, consider waiving or not including the financing contingency. But again, the risk you're taking is if you lose your job, something happens, you mind skips a beat and you decide to buy a boat as well, and now suddenly you're not financially able to buy this property. So anytime you're waiving a contingency, there's always a risk, right?
So Lindsay, our last major question that we have for you is, what are your thoughts regarding building versus buying in today's housing market? And keep in mind, I'm guessing that some of those factors or considerations might be things like the inflation for the supply chain issues that are causing that, inflation due to labor costs or the lack thereof of labor. The Fed were thinking about hiking up interest rates rather aggressively, or that was the theory. Maybe that now might not come to pass, but there's still those inflationary concerns with the supply and demand that we spoke about earlier with regards to the buying process, so on and so forth.
That's a great question, because I wanted to talk about this client I have. They're like literally the worst client I've ever had, and it's myself and Greg. I joke with Greg all the time. We are so lucky that I'm a realtor, because if I wasn't, not a single realtor would ever want to work with Greg and I, because we are just like the pickiest, worst clients ever. And so when I have a client that's like, oh, Lindsay, I'm so sorry, I'm so picky, I'm like, nothing compares to myself and my partner, Greg. So like, you are in the clear. So late last year, well, actually, since we moved into this house that I don't necessarily love, we have been thinking about building. So we spent a lot of time. We worked with actually, now that I think of it, 4 different builders in the past year. And it has been a nightmare the entire time. I won't even sugarcoat it. So Greg and I both had a really great year last year. We saved like crazy. We came up with a budget that, when we said it out loud, made us want to vomit, because it was just more money than we ever thought that we would want to spend. But we're like, we can do it. We're going to build this beautiful house. And then we started to talk to builders who almost laughed in our face when we told them what our budget was. So again, we wanted to build something relatively special. So we interviewed with 3 custom builders, and then we interviewed with 1 semi-custom, track builder. And the way that it works is you talk to maybe a sales associate, you talk about maybe what some of your options or interests are, and then they go back to the builder, and then the builder kind of quotes you a number. So our first wrong turn was we were talking to a sales associate. This was with a custom builder, and he quoted us X amount per square feet. Went to the builder. We had spent time literally designing everything from head to toe. We drafted our own floor plans, Pinterest like crazy, all the different rooms. This is how we want it to look. Builder came back, it would be $200,000 more than what we were originally quoted. Okay, thank you, have a nice day. Again, reasoning was mainly just materials and labor and all of that kind of stuff. So moved on to the next one. Relatively same conversation. It was, they really are only, the custom builders are really only catering to those who have a good chunk of money. And I'll just throw a number out there, like 750 or more is kind of what they're looking for as far as like a starting price for like custom home. And when I say custom home, I mean like you're really designing everything, which was higher than where we wanted to be. So then that's kind of where we came back to the quote unquote track / custom builder. And so with custom builds, and I don't want to get too far into this because I'm not a lender, but you do what's called a construction loan. Food for thought for those who own a home and are thinking of building from scratch is that to do a construction loan, you have to have the funds ready to go. You can't use the equity out of your home when you sell it. But when we met with our half custom, half track builder, we wanted to go with them mainly because they would do a turnkey loan or a normal 30-year loan. And so we wouldn't have to sell our house first. We would get approved, and the builder basically takes on the risk when they do a turnkey loan. So the builder basically buys the lot. It's their money that they're using to build your house, and then you close on it like you would a normal existing home with a 30-year mortgage. Whereas again, construction, you then actually have to roll into a 30-year or 15-year or 20 years. So you're actually closing twice. So we can incur, again, additional closing costs, closing twice. But anyways, met with this, semi-custom builder, spent a ton of time, again, picking out all our finishes. Oh, I'll get back to you in 3 days. That was 2 months ago. And she never followed up. So that, and then coupled with a friend of mine is building from scratch, and they were supposed to be done, I think in March. Their house was supposed to be done. Windows are so delayed. They've had to pay all sorts of extra costs to rush them. They've had to switch manufacturers for the windows. It's just been kind of a nightmare. And so again, in an ideal world, custom build, they would quote you maybe 6 to 8 months to complete it. A track builder could get your house done actually in like 4 months. But now I've heard like a year to a year and a half is what you should be expecting if you're building custom. And so again, if you're doing custom, there's that construction loan. So you pay interest on that money and you have to pay these draws. And now that's going to be drawn out for an even longer period of time. So definitely building, you definitely get more of what you want, right? When you're building, a lot of people turn to building like myself, where you have specific needs or you're just not finding what you want in existing homes. And so it's definitely something that if you have the time to do it, it's a great option. It is definitely not something that is going to save you time, and it's definitely not something that you're probably going to recognize even in the first year of starting the process. So again, with a turnkey loan, that means that the builder is taking on all those extra costs, because in your offer to purchase, that number is what you're going to pay at closing, which is why it's advantageous for a buyer to find a builder that's willing to do turnkey. Whereas new construction, with two of the different custom builders we talked to, they were actually going to push on the uncertainty of lumber prices onto the consumer. So and they say that they're straightforward and transparent about this, which again, because I'm a realtor, I think I read things maybe a little bit closer than the average layperson, but they built in a 30% buffer for lumber. And so me being me, a little anal retentive, I don't want to show up to the closing table not knowing like what my purchase price is going to be. Some people are cool with that, and whoever you are, I'm jealous of how go with the flow you are, because that is just not me. But that is something, if you're not working with a realtor in the new construction process, please, please, please read over and question anything that you think looks weird. But again, if you've never built a house before, you might just think, oh yeah, 30% markup, like, that's normal. No, it's not normal. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit of insight with the new construction process. Is it's not as easy as it was.
It's interesting to hear about the building process, Lindsay, because another podcast guest of ours, Tony Bickmore, who happens to be my brother, who's a contractor in Salt Lake City. It is to the point now where him and other contractors won't even give price or time because they don't know it and they don't know how to provide it. And it is even got to a point where there's a bigger builder within the Salt Lake City community where they've actually sent out letters to their vendors or their subcontractors saying that if you bring an invoice that has not been told to us or explained to the client that it's an increase in price, then we're going to find somebody else to work with because it's gotten that bad. So from a builder's perspective, it even goes down to the subcontracting level and to the vendors where they're not even getting at least notified of price increases before it hits the invoice for the client. So there's zero communication about the increase in price, which is really, really hard for the builder because it puts it back onto the builder to be able to do it. And then being like, hey, whoa, wait for that. So it, like what you're saying, is very real and it's a real problem. And Tony's comment on it, which is very interesting, is a lot of people want to blame it on supply chain issues, but he said what it's really is it's masking the labor shortage, and that we don't have enough people within the area to install. So he's like, it's not that hard to find a microwave or to find a new stove. What's hard is to find someone to install it, and that's not going away. That's the problem. Is that it's only going to become worse unless other people start driving into the trades, which is not happening at the moment. So even if supply chain got better, it still may have the same issues when it comes to just the labor shortage in general, which isn't just interesting. So
this has all been great with regards to my original question, but could you maybe touch a little bit on how you think that rising interest rates, if and when they do occur, how they will affect buyers and sellers?
So they've already gone up. I was talking to a lender friend of mine, and they've gone up a lot more than even what lenders thought that they would in a shorter period of time than what they were expecting. So I had a buyer last year who actually significantly decreased her interest of purchase price because of how much interest rates have gone up even from last year, which is tough because again, with purchase prices going up, to decrease your budget is going to be really tough. But rent is going up too. And so, and I'm going to talk about first-time home buyers because I feel like they're the ones that are being impeded on, unfortunately, the most. It's like, you're paying $1,500 to $1,800 in rent. You could get a mortgage for that as well, but again, you have to jump through all these hoops, and you don't buy today, it's just going to be more expensive tomorrow. And so that's been just kind of a really hard lesson to be teaching buyers is I would say you really have to stick with it, and you really just have to bite the bullet that if you're on the fence of buying, I don't want to say it's only going to get worse, but like interest rates, they are going to continue to go up. And again, with inflation and with rising home prices, that's not going to go anywhere anytime soon. And I know a lot of people think, oh, we're going to have another crash like we had, in 07, 08. And yes, I think the stock market is going to correct itself. And here I am talking about your job, which I'm not trying to do, but I know that we've had a very strong market in that sense that yes, that is going to correct itself. And when that corrects itself, sometimes people think, well, then real estate is going to be drastically affected. And again, Madison is such an insulated market that I don't see home prices leveling off anytime soon, and I don't see home prices going down anytime soon. And so, if you think about like my parents, they bought their house and interest rates were 16%, but the purchase price of their house was like $50,000. So, there's definitely a difference when we're looking at higher interest rates and we're looking at higher home prices, and we're not really looking at higher wages for people getting paid. And so I think that's what people are getting upset about the most is, again, I'll take my buyer from last year, for example. She's like, I'm not making any more money. And yet home prices are going up, interest rates are going up, and now my monthly payment is going to be going up. Like, where is that money coming from, kind of thing? So I think buyers are mainly first-time home buyers are definitely feeling that. Whereas like the upper level buyers, like my buyer who's looking at 500,000, she's like, I talk about interest rates and like, they're only going to continue to go up. And she's like, well, does that really affect anybody? So again, there are those who, $20-$30 a month isn't a big deal for them with a rising interest rate. Whereas there are those people where $20 to $30 a month affects them a lot. So again, mainly the first time home buyers, I think, are the ones that are being affected the most.
I just wanted to hammer on that one point there, the last one you made there, Lindsay, about the extra cost. So I was just doing some math as you were talking. So Ying found a statistic that I think she said that the lowest interest rates that was, I can't remember when, was like 2.6% at one point for a 30-year mortgage. And now I'm on Zillow Mortgages calculator, which I don't know if it's accurate, but they're pulling a rate in there of 3.89%. So I was just doing some quick and dirty math. That would result for a $300,000 purchase price, 20% down, 30-year fixed. That would result in an increase from a principal and interest mortgage payment of $961 per month to $1,131 per month. So that's an increase of $170, which is an increase in your principal and interest payment, your home payment, of a little over 17%. So for an interest rate increase of 1.29%, it's a significant 17+% increase in your mortgage payment. So it can be significant. But what I find to be interesting is that prices, it's still young. I mean, I know that it's not going to happen right away. And each market is different, to your excellent point about how Madison is an isolated market. But at some point, prices will re-rate to reflect interest rates, but it will take time. And will it happen here in the Madison-Dane County market? Maybe not. Maybe not as it will through nationwide on average, is what I would argue. I'm curious, do you have any follow-ups?
Yeah, no, and I totally agree. And that's just what's tough is like, Greg is a numbers guy too, and we talk about interest rates all the time, but it's like, we always feel like we're just like a little bit behind on the times, like, now prices are going up, now interest rates are going up. And it's just like, number one, it's a classic example of supply and demand. And so a lot of people will say, oh, well, when interest rates go up, that's going to affect the demand. And it's like, we are so out of balance right now, like really, really out of balance, that is going to take quite some time for the demand to slow down enough for the supply to catch up. I'm not going to blame the baby boomers, but we still have the issue of the baby boomers. They're living longer, they're healthier, they've made smart investments, And now they're gobbling up a lot of what the first time home buyers want to purchase. And so that's been happening really even since I got started in the industry 7 years ago. We've had this issue of first time home buyers are in this, $200,000 to $300,000 price range. And so are these baby boomers who are downsizing, who could care less what interest rates are because they're buying it in cash. So it definitely, I think, affects buyers more than maybe people think that it does. As interest rates go up, they're hoping that home prices are going to level off. And to your point, I don't see that happening, unfortunately, anytime soon. So
Thanks, Lindsay. I mean, that's great information. In the spirit of what we usually do, go around the table here and with some closing remarks. I've been chosen, I guess, to go first. So two thoughts come into mind. One, based off the last piece you just said, but I'll do that second. A very wise man named Timothy Bickmore once said to me, as I constructed the home I sit in now, which lucky for my family was done in 2018, 2019, and didn't have to deal with some of the stuff that we're seeing today. And lucky for us, we had a really great builder who was great to work with on top of it. My experience different than what most people have experienced. Tim said to me as I entered into it, and I think this could be applied not just to building, but just to buying into real estate in general, or selling real estate, is you have this triangle of things to achieve, right? So either you can have high quality, or you can have a great cost, all right, great price, or you could have the right time to have your project completed, whether you're buying or building. But you can have two of the three, but no one gets all three, right? In order to have the other two, one of those has to give. One of those isn't quite what you want. Okay, so second one is that there's always opportunities. So keep that in mind, right? If, for example, inflation were to indeed increase quickly and it does change demand, well, then perhaps if you're willing to wait and not get caught up in hype, you will find a decreased price on something, perhaps, right? And that might mean that you pay a higher rate. But if you have a situation where you've planned for, if you have the ability to have cash flow ready to go, to have cash ready to go, it might be a situation where you buy down points if indeed that then lowers your interest rate on a home that you're going to be in for a long time. And that kind of wraps up my second piece on that. Is there's always opportunities, but you have to take this in connection with time frame. Always. Again, same true with the publicly traded stock market, right? Time frame makes all the difference. So it may be a situation where buying in and out of homes every couple of years doesn't fly for you anymore. It might be a situation where you accept, I'm going to perhaps pay more for this now, or I'm going to pay more on the lending side to buy down X, Y, and Z, but I'm going to need to make a commitment to be here longer so that my situation plays out. So the comments that I've heard too about, oh, well, I'm going to wait because inflation is at the door. I don't know that the turkey has to be carved that one way. That is what I have, and I will pass the baton to you, Tim.
Oh, yay. So Lindsay knows this, but been in the market for looking for a house, which has not been the most enjoyable experience of my life for a lot of different reasons. A, because I think I'm a planner and I think it's difficult, but the one thing that is really hard to balance, I think, is patience. Patience is definitely a virtue for a reason. And it's been very hard to be patient to try to find something that works for specifically my situation, which in this market is not the easiest. But I was told by somebody who told me the triangle story, a very smart gentleman, Tony Bickmore, that the only power that you really have in this market is patience when it comes to being a buyer. And if you don't have that, then you don't have any leverage, to be very honest. And so being patient, though, has a lot of willpower to say no or to move on and not get up in FOMO. And I think that kind of brings me to my second point, to echo Dan, which is understanding what you're buying and maybe what your exit strategy is, which comes down to time frame. Is this a 1 to 5? Maybe you've skipped maybe you have skipped potentially out of the first time home buyer prices. Maybe you need to wait till you can actually scale up to the next price to just go into your first home being the 10 to 15, 20-year home, which, yes, as Dan said, you could be paying more, higher interest rates, potentially a higher price. But let's say that you go through a cycle and let's say interest rates come back down. No one ever said you couldn't refinance, right? It's happened to a lot of people. Like Lindsay said, my mom mentioned to me the other weekend that when they bought their house, it was 16%. She still has a mortgage on that house and she refinanced it. And not saying that you're going to pay, you'll probably still pay more money than getting it at 2.65% and letting it ride for the rest of the time. But overall, the information changes. And when the information changes, you have to then change your strategy and look upon it and to see if it makes sense for you. So that's what I would say is it's patience, and then also understanding what your positioning is, and then understanding your exit strategy to then be comfortable going in and maybe paying those higher prices at the time. It can take a more comfortable decision-making process when you're looking at it from multiple angles than being isolated into, I just need to be in a home. And some people don't have that luxury. I know, Lindsay, you've mentioned that some of your clients have been like, I just need a home. That scares me as a buyer when I don't need a home, but I'm competing to somebody that needs a home and is willing to do some things to get into that said home, which is always tough, difficult. So thank you, Lindsay. I always appreciate your time. Nathaniel, you're up next.
I echo Tim. Be patient, be rational.
To echo Dan and Tim, there are people who are willing to be a little bit crazy with getting the property. And I think you as a buyer need to be patient and comfortable, and I guess not so hard on yourself if it ends up not working out. Because I tell every buyer, put your best foot forward so that you have no regrets. And if you write the best offer you can and someone else was willing to pay, even if it's $1,000 more than you, if you're like, I really don't want to pay more than this, that's how the cookie crumbled. And now we're going to move on because you put your best foot forward, and now we're going to find something better. But to Dan's point, I've heard the 80-20 rule. So you get 80% of what you want out of a house. And that's really, really important to remember and to understand. But Dan, I'm with you. I think we're a little bit less than that in this crazy market, where you might need to get creative. And I'm never going to steer you away from or steer you into maybe an avenue that I think you should take. I let the market speak to you and let you know, like, hey, you only wanted to spend $200,000 in Madison proper, and you only have 5% down, and you don't want to do any work to the house. Well, you're going to see very quickly, not a whole lot of houses are going to be popping up that meet your criteria. So it's kind of up to you if you want to expand out your search. But to Dan's point, there are plenty of houses out there. It's just, unfortunately, the majority of the people want the same house. So if you're willing to get creative, if you have the resources to maybe take on a house that needs a little bit more work, or you work from home and you're able to maybe expand out and live in Marshall or Evansville or one of these more outlying areas, there might be more opportunities for you to find a house at a lower price point. I'm not saying it's going to be less competitive, because there's competition everywhere, but like Dan said, you can get two of the three, but you can't get all three. So yes, patience, time on your side is great, and always, always, always have a backup plan. I never want you to be homeless. Please don't give up your apartment before we find something. Just always have a plan.
Thanks again, Lindsay. Thank you for joining us again. Thanks for all your years of friendship and expertise. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in and listening to the conversation. We always appreciate you doing so. Have a great night. Until next time, take care.
Thank you for taking the time to start your journey of thinking differently and listening to LBW talk about stuff they love. Until next time.